Voter fraud is happening right now in America. Only as Republicans were committing it. Meet Charlie White, Indiana's former Republican Secretary of State. This man's job was to protect the integrity of voting, to keep fraud out of elections. But on Saturday, he lost his job after being convicted of voter fraud. A total of 6 felony counts, including lying on voter registration card, voting in another precinct, and submitting a false ballot. But conservatives are getting pretty good at this voter fraud thing. Last month, conservative smear artists went undercover at the New Hampshire primary using names of voters who recently died. And today, in Maryland, a second trial began in a Republican robocalling plot to suppress black voter turnout during the 2010 gubernatorial election. One GOP operative has already been convicted. No wonder Republicans are so worried about fraud. It's happening in their own party. Joining me now, Judith Browne Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project, a civil rights group focused on the issues of democracy and race. Judith, thank you for joining me again and being here tonight.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton.
Judith, Republicans have proposed all kinds of voting laws, but how ironic is it that they're the ones being caught committing it?
That's right. This is just true hypocrisy. The people who go around saying there's rampant voter fraud in the system, that there are people voting who shouldn't be voting, are the same people who are getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar. To have the person who is responsible for running elections in the state of Indiana, which was the pioneer around voter ID restrictions, caught red-handed committing voter fraud, shows that the real voter fraud is being conducted by the right.
Now, when you and I and others have come out against this, it's because when we look at the facts, out of 2002 to 2007, 86 prosecutions out of 300 million votes. So there's no widespread voter fraud, 0.00003. This is from the Bush administration. This is not data from you or I. This is Bush administration. So it makes many of us feel there's another motive here about changing these laws. And then talking about hypocrisy, as you said, Judith, why didn't they have voter ID in the Iowa caucuses of their own Republican primaries and caucuses leading to nomination? They just had an Iowa caucus. No voter ID. So they must not believe that there's a widespread problem other than a few of their own practitioners.
That's right. They would want to have voter ID for some, not for themselves. So in Iowa, they didn't use voter ID for their own Republican primary. But when it comes to the general election, these same folks who are committing voter fraud, who are engaged in trickery to make sure that people are deceived and given misinformation about Election Day, telling people to vote on one day when the election day is on Tuesday, go vote on Thursday, or don't vote because, in fact, your guy won already. These are the same people who are passing laws that are intended to disenfranchise millions of voters, most of whom would be people of color, young people, elderly, and the disabled. And it's all for partisan gain.
Now, we saw in Iowa that ballots were lost and results were reversed, giving Santorum the win over Romney. The GOP state chair had to resign, but yet these voter ID laws are being considered in 34 states. One of the other things that was interesting, Judith, is when Mr. White was convicted Saturday, yesterday he was on Fox News Sunday lashing out on everyone, including Republican Governor Mitch Daniels, a fellow Republican. Watch what he was saying.
Mitch Daniels has voted incorrectly. According to the standards put on by me, the last 10 straight elections, he votes down at the governor's mansion where everyone knows he does not live.
I mean, it's incredible, Judith. But let me say this. One of our concerns is to maintain and preserve voting rights. Let me show you, 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King and others marched from Selma to Montgomery in really awakening the country to the fight for voting rights. And on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis, and who's now Congressman Jose Williams and others, was beaten. They took 5 days in march to Montgomery. Many of us feel that what's going on with these voter ID laws are undermining now the voting rights. And end of last year, we marched in Washington around voter rights, voter ID. Thousands came out and marched with us in Washington. And on the anniversary, March 4th, of the Montgomery March, of the Selma to Montgomery March, we're going to take 5 days and march again from Selma to Montgomery against these voter ID laws. We're going to do something about it, and we're going to take a lot of our Politics Nation's audience with us as we march the footsteps of Dr. King. Judith, thank you for your time.